Good morning, dearly beloved. As a person who was born on Dominica during the period of self-government after World War II and whose family resided in the police service, father and grandfather were police officers and who had the high honor and privilege of having represented police officers over the years. And the late Commissioner of Police, Owen Phillip, having been not only a sort of mentor of a sorts, having been a neighbor, but I had the honor of sitting with him over many years and being a friend of his and speaking at his funeral. And having been a cadet during the time he was commissioner of police, I want to send a sober warning to the officers and men of the Dominica Police Service that I dearly love. Commissioner, officers of the Dominica Police Service, the Dominican people are not your enemies. They are your fellow citizens. They are your family members. Do not allow yourselves to turn into a motley crowd of mobsters, gangsters, bandits, and militia of the Roosevelt-scared regime because you've been told to do so. Do not brutalize your fellow citizens because you've been told to do so. It is wrong. And since the advent of self-government and the eradication of slavery, we had been evolving, sometimes with difficulty, to a better place. For instance, during the 1970s and the period of Black Power and the Dread movement, there were issues of police brutality. But never in that period were people roused out of their beds in late night raids and arrested and placed in jail in the manner that's happening now. I would like to take this moment to compare and contrast the way in which law enforcement operated when in 1974, 51 years ago, there was an uprising at Grand Bay. Grand Bay, which is now a footstool of this regime, which has lost its luster as Liberation City. What happened at Grand Bay? Well, after World War II, a Lebanese Dominican by the name of Elias Nassif bought an estate. And many Grand Bayrians were evicted from land that they had occupied formerly on that estate from the days of slavery. And in the early 1970s, a movement arose in Grand Bay that was antagonistic to that treatment that was considered exploitative. The famous Grand Bay band later made a song, Puyo Koko. The Predial Lasny Act had made it a crime to take agricultural produce. Chubby, the singer, I believe, Grell, another person who I knew, both, I believe, were arrested. There was an uprising, therefore, in 1974 at Grand Bay. The state house was attacked, cattle carried away, coconut trees cut down, and the big Nassif general store at the area around the Rosa Market on King George V Street was burnt one morning, and I ran from my home in Didier Lane to see the fire engulfing that structure, which 51 years later is still in ruins. What was the response of the government of Dominica then, led by Edward Oliver LeBlanc? Well, first of all, a localized or selective state of emergency was declared by the governor, Sir Louis Coles-Latig, specific to Grand Bay and Grand Bay only. And the police and the defense force went to Grand Bay and they stayed at the Grand Bay Government School, and they did not attack the villagers. They did not shoot into homes. They did not say, advance, advance, pepper, pepper, as was said on the 19th March, 2025 in Roseau by a senior officer to the Rod Squad. There was no wanton and reckless discharge of firearms into homes or tear gas into homes, dousing the elderly in toxic fumes. None of that happened. Instead, one Inspector Bannis, whose family I know well, using clinical methodology, good investigative technique, arrested a gentleman by the name of, his nickname was UNICEF, and brought him into Roseau. And with government intervention, Mr. LeBlanc and his ministers, including one H.L. Christian, who had started social welfare at London University, met with the villagers and brought matters to a quiet end. There were no mass arrests. There was no mass brutalization of the village of Grand Bay. It never happened. It never happened. Things were done within the law, and the citizens went about their business. Dominica moved forward. I want to take this moment to also state that in 1972, at the age of 11, I joined the Dominica Cadet Corps. And 2 years later, I became a member of the band. In the same year, 1974, there was a camp at La Plaine, alongside people like Major Twist Bertrand, Commandant of the Defense Force, Lennox Royer, who was then head of the SSU, that Special Service Unit of the Royal Dominica Police Force, and one young corporal by the name of Matthias Lestrade, who years later would help us revive the Dominica Cadet Corps when he served as commissioner, alongside Superintendent of Police Nicholas George. We camped at La Plaine, the band providing musical accompaniment for church parade, and the Defense Force and the SSU doing night exercises during what was then the Dread War. And that Sunday morning, before we broke camp, there was a simulation of a riot. The riot squad was led by Lennox Royer. In that squad was Inspector Scary James. There was Lieutenant Malcolm Reed. There was Captain Frederick Newton. There was Corporal Howell Piper. There was Sergeant Major Ashton Benjamin. Many of those names are known to Dominicans at that time for matters that occurred later. But for purposes of this discussion, I will say that the cadets were made to take out our belts and our caps, and we were the simulated riot squad. And we were throwing little tufts of grass and pebbles while the entire cabinet of Patrick John, Vic Revere, H.L. Christian, and others were on a hilltop looking down at the simulated riot. And after we threw a few pebbles and other things, not to hurt because we were all part of the same team, we were just simulating a riot, Lennox Royer read a proclamation that there was now a riotous assembly and that we should disperse or smoke would be used. And then a banner was unfurled that said, "Disperse or we smoke." And then when we did not, they charged us. They threw a few little smoke grenades. I was arrested. All of us were arrested. Well, not really arrested. It was a simulated event. It was a play acting sort of exercise. I only mention that to say that I did not, in viewing any of the tape, see any unfurling of a banner or hear any proclamation before tear gas was used on March 19th, 2025. I also will further state that I do not know that there was any declaration of state of emergency at Salisbury or any proclamation was made which would have legitimized any wholesale attack on that village. So basically what we have in Dominica is the use of state resources to bludgeon, to oppress Dominican people who stand up for right. And so as Dominicans, we must pivot now from simply talking about electoral reform to talking about human rights and the loss of human rights and other civil liberties by the Dominican people. Those human rights and civil liberties must be recovered, or what we will have facing us is a police state enforced by a police service that has lost its way and that increasingly will lose the respect of the citizenry that it requires the respect of if it is to competently and professionally execute its work. In conclusion, there is no reason that a police officer, whoever he is, and he must be arrested and tried, should have clobbered a young man or elderly man, I'm uncertain as to his age, knocked him to the ground and walk away, when before that I saw no weapon in the hand of the person, I saw no stick, I saw him throwing no stones. He was walked upon, struck to the ground. I'm not sure if he was pistol whipped, fell to the ground. Police walked over him and kept walking. That is wrong and must be dealt with by the arrest of that officer and his prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. In conclusion, I ask all Dominicans to rally for a commission of inquiry into the attack on Salisbury, rally for the release and the dismissal of all charges against the political prisoners who have been arrested over the past week. And we ask again for the government of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerrit, if it is not prepared to resign, to cease and desist from its brutalization of the Dominican people and its dispossession of the Dominican people as we suffer a dong economy with a government dominated by foreign money launderers who have placed monies belonging to the state outside the consolidated fund and otherwise have relegated the Dominican people to second-class citizenship and oppression in their very own country. Thank you for listening.